I'll invite the question, does anyone here think that Banksy hasn't been good for Bristol? No, so we all agree that Banksy has been good for Bristol. In which case, I wonder, John, if you could tell us a little bit about when you first met Banksy at Barton Hill and what sort of impact he made way back when.
First of all, what I'll do is I'll explain a bit about the history of myself and my involvement with the aerosol art scene, stroke graffiti art scene in Bristol. I first got interested in aerosol art, stroke graffiti art in 1981 when I visited Amsterdam. Spent a week there visiting the city, various graffiti artists I met up there, photographed various pieces of work on the metro, came back to Bristol, invigorated and inspired by what I'd seen in Amsterdam, and noticed there wasn't much culturally going on similar in Bristol until probably around '83. At that time, Bristol was just sowing the seeds of sort of like an underground movement in terms of graffiti art in Bristol. I basically was volunteering at the time as a part-time youth worker for the local authority, and one of my roles as a youth worker was to do outreach work, which was to go away from being centre-based and to make contact with young people who were disaffected with either the youth service, the career service, or both. And more contact that I came into people with were young people who were graffiti artists, who were basically expressing themselves illegally in Bristol via the train tracks, via the metro system, warehouses, people's private property. Not that I was in agreement with that, but that's where they were painting. So my job specification, as written by a local tourist controlled authority, was to basically go out, make contact with these young people, bring them to a centre that basically had someone like myself that was understanding of the culture of graffiti art, somewhere where they could paint legally, somewhere where they could express themselves safely, somewhere where there was someone like myself who could nurture their talents and basically promote the work that they was doing to a wider audience, and that's basically where I came in. Barnum's reputation by 1985 had spread across Bristol as well as outside of Bristol, and at the time most of the main high-profile artists from Bristol were using Barnum Youth Club. They felt that they could work there safely, they could experiment with different mediums. They also had free paint provided for them, which I basically acquired via various paint manufacturers throughout the United Kingdom.
John, can I just ask you a quick question? What was the average age of the kids at this
The average age of most of the young people painting at the project at the time was ranging from 13 to 17, 18 years old. So from there, good bonds formed between myself, the young people, paint companies, and Barton's reputation as an aerosol art centre grew not just only in Bristol, but I then was starting to be in contact with other cities in the UK, graffiti writers, mainly writing illegally in London, Birmingham, Manchester, wherever, plus artists based in New York, Los Angeles, Toronto in Canada, Sydney, Australia, Germany, Paris, Amsterdam. I basically had a network of contacts throughout Europe and the world, basically, all who had heard of Bristol. All of the links were being established between the various artists from Bristol to wherever, and a strong bond and partnership was formed with the aerosol art community. So, forward 6 years, 1991, and a young snotty-nosed lad cycled up to Barton Hill with a camera. That young lad, I didn't know who he was at the time because we had lots of young lads visit the club, taking photographs, exchanging addresses, telephone numbers, exchanging pieces of artwork. That young lad was none other than Banksy. Banksy basically cites Barton Hill Youth Club as the most inspiring stretch of concrete in this city, but also in the United Kingdom, and it inspired him to creatively lay his path of where he is to this present day. So that is where my involvement is with Banksy. I'm not going to claim any credit for Banksy's work, because I'm not, because I didn't actually direct directly worked with Banksy to encourage him to work. He just came to Bartonhill every maybe 2-3 weeks and seen it as a good place to come, to meet with other artists. But the links that he formed with those artists at Bartonhill were links that he carried on throughout, say, from 2001 to the present day, because he met such people as Inky, Kato, Soccer, all people that are seminal. Aerosol artist Nick Walker, all have painted with Banksy and have all been involved with various shows with him, and those links all formed the Barton Youth Club.
So did he paint down there? Did you see
He has painted the Barton Youth Club, and there's various books that are like a location guide to where Banksy's painted, whether it be Bristol, Birmingham, London, tour guides where you can actually see where it's painted if the work's still standing. One of his pieces of work is still standing at Barton Youth Club today. Very faded, paint flaking off the wall, but it's still visible as a Banksy piece. It is also available to be seen. I think I might have wrote Richard here.
We haven't put it on the app.
Ooh.
You know, we will be updating it. You know.
Richard's actually done an app for the iPhone, smartphone, to say where you can obviously photograph Banksy's work to the present day in Bristol.
And Mark, maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about the present day Banksy. Mark worked very closely with him on the app. He basically it's tour of Bristol, taking in the 14, well, there's actually 16. 2 of them we chose not to include because we wanted to talk to Barton Youth Club about whether they thought it was appropriate that their piece wasn't included, which we will be doing. And the other one is in a shop on Park Road, so we obviously couldn't include it without the permission of the shop owner. It's a tattoo parlour, so it's not visible from the street.
Well, I think I'm probably very similar to most of you guys in the sense that I've liked Banksy's work for a long time, and I've lived and worked around this area for quite a number of years. And you think that Banksy's kind of like one of us, he's like a sort of Bristol person, and it's just consistently amazed me how famous and huge he becomes, because when you think, I keep thinking he's kind of reached his peak, and then he goes and does something like Exit the Gift Shop and kind of like reaches a whole new level where he gets even more famous and even more kind of like globally recognised, and you think, well, where can he go from here? And then he's kind of breaking America, more and more. I think he's gone from being kind of an underground artist in Bristol to being really famous in Bristol. He then moved to London and was an underground artist in London, and then became a hugely famous artist in London. And he kind of keeps doing that, and he went to London, he went to America and was kind of underground and a bit hip there amongst a few celebrities. And then he's reaching a stage now where he's just going massive, even more massive. And you just think, well, where can it stop? And I'm really interested to see how somebody with such a subversive message can become so sort of part of the mainstream. It just doesn't make sense. It's a kind of paradox at the sort of heart of his work, really. And I don't claim to understand it, but I'm just kind of amazed by it. And I think when the Bristol show was happening, the Banksy versus Bristol Museum show, which is 2009. I thought again, that he'd reached his peak, and I thought this was it now. He's kind of maxed out this kind of like crazy ride of graffiti, and I thought that was going to be the peak. So what I found amazing at the time of that show was that everybody was talking about Banksy. I'm sure most of you here will remember that everyone was talking about Banksy at that time. So I started recording some of these stories that I was hearing, really good stories about it. Can you just have a quick show of hands who saw that show in Bristol? Yeah, okay, most of you did. So. Do you remember how the work was changing from day to day? You would go in there one day, and it would be set up in a certain way, and then you go, if you were lucky enough to, or persistent enough to go back in and see it again, or you heard from somebody else, that work would change, yeah? And everyone was saying, well, how's this work changing? Banksy must be coming back into the city and changing this work himself. and there was a story amongst the traders on Park Street that he actually had a secret entrance to the museum to come in the dead of night to change the work. You know, and this was a genuine story that people were kind of telling each other. Yeah, it's absolutely true. Banksy is coming back to Bristol. He's coming back in, you know, using these kind of secret entrances, these ancient secret entrances to the museum, changing the work inside. So this was a sort of brilliant sort of story that I was hearing, and I started recording these stories really. So the book that is due to be out any week is a collection of those kinds of stories. You know, some of them are complete utter bollocks, like that one. You know?
Well, actually, I'll stop you ever remember.
It is actually true.
Well, stop you that many years ago, some students during Rag Week actually did break into the museum through what's now Brown's, the cafe next door, which I think was a refectory at the time to the university, and stole Alfred the gorilla.
Yeah.
Stuffed gorilla. So there
is actually a secret entrance to the museum.
Yeah. But do you have any questions so far? I mean, and do take the opportunity to ask two people who probably, John most certainly knows a lot about Banksy in his formative years, and Mark, who's done a huge amount of research on Banksy in his later years. So if there are any questions, just put your hand up and ask them. It's obviously a debate rather than just us talking to Chris.
Okay, of the people who were in the Barton Hill Youth Club, most of those guys are about writing, about letter form.
Yeah.
And clearly Banksy's not particularly interested in letter form. You know, what is it that you think that actually propelled him to this stellar position that he is? What makes it, and that's for everybody, it's like, what is it that differentiates him? Because I think that also links back to, you know, if you're talking about how Bristol was affected by Banksy, there is an argument that his overarching presence in the street art world in general has had a negative effect on the careers of many of the other artists.
Well, I'll disagree with that for straight away, because when Banksy first started painting, Banksy did do letters and characters.
Okay, great.
When he was painting predominantly with inky, plus when he was painting, we've got Dry Bread Crew, which was primarily a lad called Cato, he goes under the name now, but before that he was Junks. Also painted Rowdy, some of the other lads from Bristol. And obviously then developed into the style of what he's mainly renowned for, is stencils. But he wasn't the only person at the time doing stencils in Bristol. Jody Thomas, who's a very good artist in Bristol, was doing stencils, and even Robert Dell 3D from Mass Attack was also playing about with stencils as well, as was Nick Walker at the time. There's quite a few of them that work. I just think that Banksy's type of art, because of it being stenciled, it being quick, and the type of images it was doing made it more accessible to a wider public, whereas a lot of graffiti lettering styles, wide style especially, is only decipherable and readable to mainly the artistic aerosol community and not to the wider audience. And Banksy's mainstream and global popularisation is because a lot of people can read into what he does and can obviously relate and associate with his art form. And he made himself more accessible. But where I don't agree with you is that he's had a stifling effect on other artists in the city. I think the opposite. I think because of the focus people put on Bristol because of Banksy, it's also given other artists in Bristol the opportunity to showcase themselves, and other areas of Bristol have showcased their art, predominantly Stokes Croft, like yourself, which you're responsible for. So, you know, we've all the Credits of Passion Show, Royal Western England Academy. All of these are a knock-on effect of the Banksy effect, and that is a positive thing. So I don't think he's actually stifled other artists in the city. There's a lot of artists who are in a good living from aerosol art or related projects.
Just wonder, John, obviously you've got a vast knowledge of graffiti aerosol art around the world. Where do you think Bristol stands? Objectively, I know it's difficult for you to know something the artist for so long. Is the Bristol stuff, do you think, as good as Amsterdam or Berlin, or is it?
I'd say what I like about Bristol is there's a lot of diverse styles, a lot of Yeah, there's a lot of diverse styles, and there's no one particular style that you could say that is a Bristol style, or whereas you could go to places like LA and Amsterdam, their writers have a particular style. The bulk of them have a trademark style, whereas you come to Bristol, there's a lot of diversity, a lot of experimentation. Also, that is made up of the fact that a lot of the residing artists of the city now have come from other cities and made their home Bristol, where they've come here by university to do art foundation courses, media studies. So it's made Bristol a melting pot of styles and fusions, and there are a lot of different various styles, which only enriches the Bristol city. And I personally, I'm biased because I'm a Bristol boy born and bred, but I honestly think Bristol is without doubt probably the most leading city in the UK, if not Europe, for street art, graffiti art.
Can I add a little bit to Chris's question about what makes Banksy different?
Yeah.
I think from what I can see is that he is maybe the first, but certainly he was certainly the first of graffiti artists to get really, really focused on taking graffiti out of the sort of scene and making it bigger. He's always, like I was kind of alluding to at the beginning there, he's always pushing to the next limit. You know, he's always kind of like, you know, pushing out Bristol. You know, he made a name for himself in Bristol and then pushed himself to London, pushed it as far as he could in London, and he's looking for the next thing. So he's gone to America, you know, and then he went to and doing stuff in Israel. He's always looking for the next thing, you know, and he's been ahead of the kind of game in that sense, you know. And I think he's kind of set a trail, you know.
Sorry, Chris. Question over there.
I didn't mean to interrupt. What you're really describing is a really visionary person when you.
Essentially, yeah.
I'm just sort of intrigued as to whether you could see that in him as a teenager.
To be honest, I didn't see that in him. I just seen him as a young lad at the time who was someone who was doodling on papers. Mainly, most artists when they start have a piece book where they sketch out, they practice, they come up with designs, ideas, and he would just have maybe a doodle book. But looking at those doodles, you would never have foresaw to the level and status that he's acquired now. I would have never have related that lad there to the person that he is now, and how he is.
And not as a personality either when you're talking to him,
No.
it wasn't particularly brilliant.
Because I think as
he was a bit younger, wasn't he?
he was a lot young, he was a bit younger than some of the others, but I think obviously a lot of his art is satire, and a lot of it is very political based, whereas as a young lad then, wouldn't have come across that way.
I think that's one of the key things for me. I think actually, as we're lucky enough to have with John and Mark here, I think one key thing for me is Operation Amazon. I mean, John was at the heart of this. Basically, it was a big bust in 86.
87. Operation Anderson was the biggest ever transport police operation in the United Kingdom, and still is to date, to illegal street art in the United Kingdom. And basically myself and 72 aerosol artists from Bristol, Bath and the surrounding areas were arrested. 72? For criminal damage. The police spent £500,000 on an undercover operation to try and eradicate the illegal aspect of the art in Bristol and surrounding areas. Myself, I was arrested and charged with conspiracy to promote and incite individuals to commit criminal damage. Mainly what they said was I had a massive photograph collection, I had links with various artists that were working illegally in Bristol and beyond, but that was my job. My job was to bring them in and show them, to try and channel their activities into a positive way forward. To gain acceptance for their art, they would have to stop the illegal side. So obviously I was arrested, took Crown Court, was acquitted of the charges, which generated a lot of media interest in the work that I was doing, the work of the artists, and basically focused a lot of interest on Bristol as a city for this art. And what Operation Anderson achieved was to give me a platform to promote the work that I was doing, to highlight the standard and the quality of the work that could be produced given an environment that was understanding and tolerant to this art form, and to express how creative it could be and push Bristol to a wider audience. I appeared on Richard and Judy This Morning's programme. I appeared on John Craven's News Round. Had a column written about me by Richard Littlejohn in The Sun, and now obviously works for the Daily Mail. I did a documentary with the BBC that's still available now on YouTube or you can on Flickr, which was called Drawing the Line. Where do we draw the line between an acceptable crime, an unacceptable crime, and an acceptable art form? And it showed both sides of the argument. It had to be a balanced documentary, so you had the transport police and the relevant authorities are stating their case why they want to drive this art out of existence. And then my side of the story, along with the young people that I work with, arguing why we should have acceptance of aerosol art and why we needed people like myself and Barton Hill to try and channel their activities into a positive way forward. So Operation Anderson still is quite prominent to the present day, because all those young people that were brought before the courts and chastised, then obviously some were fined quite heavily.
Wasn't Inky one of the highest?
Inky was the most sought after artist in Bristol at the time for the most serious acts of criminal damage. And if you're aware of See No Evil event that took place recently in Nelson Street, Inky, Tom Bingle, was the main focus of organising that event with obviously the Bristol City Council and relevant authorities, and also a lot of the buildings that were painted at See No Evil were a lot of the buildings that these young people who were arrested in 87 and their court cases finished in 89, Magistrates Court, Juvenile Court and the Crown Courts were all painted and decorated by these very young people that were brought before the courts.
I went to court with Shebber actually. He got himself in a bit of trouble not so long ago, and I think he took great delight in painting the very building where he straightened with an ASBO, but didn't get it, unfortunately. Sorry, was there another question?
Yeah, I was just asking, but one of the things that I don't know loads about street art, but one of the things that really strikes me is there's a lot of humour in the Banksy stuff, and I wonder whether you see that.
Yeah.
I haven't really seen that around when I've seen stuff in other cities. It's more about presenting a brand, like this is me and I'm presenting my art and this is all about me. But there's a lot of humour, and I actually, for me, I really, really enjoy, and I know sometimes it's alluding to something that's, you know, comments on society or whatever in the background, but I wonder whether you see that in other cities around the world in the street art that
Can
you
I say something very, before I invite Mark and John to say? For me, one of the reasons, and I may be reading this wrong, John, but you know, you can stop me if I am. One of the reasons I think Operation Anderson was important was that Banksy, being younger than the rest, wasn't really,
He wasn't caught
he
in that.
wasn't caught in that. He was still learning his craft. People like Chio, Inky to a certain extent, they stopped writing. They're getting so much hassle from the police. Chio will tell you that all of his art books were burned down in Avonmouth. The books which were confiscated and never returned. So that come over in the night, find a police car parked outside his mum's house. They're, you know, regardless of what we think about what they did and the punishment they got an immense amount of hassle. And a lot of them stopped writing. But then, Inky and Chio came second in the World Graffiti Championship, which actually took place after Operation Anderson in Hull, which gave them that international lift. Now, Banksy appeared after Operation Anderson. In my view, is that Banksy came into a vacuum, in that the established writers were getting so much grief, stopped writing. The ones who really couldn't give a toss, the Dry Breads crew, for example, Dems and a few of the other more radical, in terms of they really couldn't care less. Banksy therefore had to work with those people who were really just waving two fingers at everybody and outside the law. And you're right, and in that, so he had that very, very radical beginning. And what he was doing was highly illegal. It came after 72 artists had been busted and treated very heavy-handed afterwards. So let's not forget, that must have taken some nerve for a relatively young lad to go out and do something which he really could have gone to prison for doing. He said that one of the reasons he moved to stencils was he could get his pieces up so quickly that he could get them up and be away. You know, he broke into Zooms, he did all sorts of highly illegal...
It was incredibly prolific as well. I mean, there was a time when, I mean, anyone who remembers that sort of, well, we're only talking about, 15 years ago, really, it's not a huge amount of time, but Banksy stencils were everywhere, they were absolutely everywhere. He absolutely blitzed this city. You know, it wasn't like he just kind of did a couple around Eastern Stokes Croft or whatever.
All of the Welsh
And then, I mean, you know, it's not almost that what I was kind of saying about this kind of constant drive to push himself. He was blitzing Clifton, you know, which I think is quite significant, you know, for a lad who was kind of like, you know, finding his way down sort of Barton Hill and, you know, not too far from here, to then sort of like to be calling out to Clifton, to sort of like, right, I'm going to make my impact on this city, everyone's going to know my name, you know, which is what he was. You know.
I think I agree with you entirely. Humour is one of the first things which attracted me to Banksy, but not just humour in the sense of, you know, laughing. There is a political point there as well. I mean, Wild West, just over the road, is probably, for me, one of his most iconic pieces. I mean, how, you know, you've got petrol bombs being thrown at the police, albeit by teddy bears. But, you know, and things more subtle stuff like the barcode leopard, you know, all those comments on consumerism. If you look at a lot of Banksy's art, it includes animals and children, vulnerable things, and they're often laboratory animals, rats and monkeys. So there's a depth to his art.
That humour's clever, because that piece goes up, you know, 10 years ago, and if it was just like the original sketches of it show kind of like it's not a teddy bear throwing it, is it? But whatever it is, but it's so if you had an image that size of somebody chucking a petrol bomb on the police, it would have been taken off by the council. To make it a teddy bear means that everyone smiles and laughs at it and thinks it's kind of, you know, quite cute and funny, but it's got a subversive message. And it stays up there for, 10 years
It's
plus.
also doing political correctness, manages to avoid censorship
Yeah,
in the same way.
Yeah.
So he's not actually offending anybody, really.
Yeah.
But if you look at it hard enough, he is. But he
Oh,
is
yeah, it's a deeply political piece.
Yeah.
it's kind of political correctness.
I think one of his most amazing feats in some ways was the Simpsons video. I don't know if anyone's seen that, the intro to The Simpsons, a year ago. Has everyone seen The Simpsons? Oh, it's on YouTube. You Google Banksy Simpsons and find it. Basically, it cuts from Homer and The Simpsons watching television. The television is a Banksy directed video piece, which is about a Korean sweatshop. And it's for that to appear on Fox TV, where it's very, very deliberately saying Fox TV and The Simpsons cause misery for thousands of people, young people, children, child labour, pollutes the atmosphere. To get that on The Simpsons, how could that possibly have happened?
I suppose it also says something about the arrogance and the strength of the corporations now, that they can actually dare to put something on their programme that quite clearly shows them in such a bad light and not give a fuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there was quite a lot of debate. I don't think they had that attitude. I think they had to have like a big internal kind of like debate before it went out. You know.
But it asks the question, doesn't it? It's challenging. I think that's what, for me, is comes across through all Banksy's art, is that it challenges. And I think you're right, it does it in a fairly subtle and humorous way.
You're raising an interesting question, an interesting kind of idea there, because I think Banksy is, maybe this is one of the things that sets him apart from other artists, his influences are wider than just other street art. You know, it's kind of, he is interested in political cartoons, and he is interested in, I'm sure I've heard him saying that Larson, is it Larson? Those American, you know, that they were a huge influence on his work. And, you know, there's loads, he draws in influences from all over. You know.
But he manages to offend everyone. It's a very clever way of getting.
I think he does. He does offend people sometimes. You know, there are always people who are offended.
Well, I think there was an interesting comment on the Daily Mail website, which I reckon they were trying to get again to unmask Banksy. And some of the posted, those of us who like Banksy don't care who he is, those who don't like Banksy don't care who he is. But which I think is very true. But John, probably one of the most salient facts about Banksy is his anonymity. Now, I've not known Banksy, but I've obviously published books about him, so I have connections, and Mark also has done a lot of research and have connections with him in his and for me, that anonymity is very, very deep. It's far more than a gimmick. I would go to the extent that it actually can be a bit concerning in some ways, and that you think someone to live their lives to that extent, be so scared and worried about people knowing who they are is an odd thing. John, is that anything that you've sort of, you know, you sort of work with him or working with people? Is that a fair comment, or is it just a front?
I personally, if he was exposed now at this very moment, would his values as an artist diminish?
Well, I don't think so, but I just wonder why he maintains. I mean, you hear all sorts of rumours.
Supporting a cult of celebrity, in which case he'd be bigger than his art.
Well, I think that there's certainly that.
And
In
Mark's
I think Mark, you touched on the fact that they're one of the myths, and probably entirely not true, is he's very self-conscious of his appearance. Now, what that implies about his appearance, I don't know, but
yeah, just a couple of thoughts about that. Really, I think there's maybe a couple of layers to it. There's the whole. Someone just said then, it's not about the artist, it's about the art, which for me is really important as well. Also, the anonymous thing, which I think is quite obvious. But then there's also there's the mystique of it as well. The fact that before I moved to Bristol, I heard about not just Banksy, but just this whole scene, and not knowing who someone is can sometimes make it just a little bit more interesting, you know.
It's not about him just not having his face connected to the work. You know, he rarely gives interviews. He rarely publishes anything that gives any comments, and there's no trivia about him. You know, there's no kind of reality TV programs like watching him go shopping for a new house or something. And it's kind of like we just don't know anything about this guy. Does he live in a big house? Does he live in a little house? Is he driving a Rolls Royce or not?
Because all of a sudden, focus would shift from him to do it.
Yeah.
To him.
Yeah. I mean, he's very clever. I mean, I don't know if he's clever or just got lucky in the sense that he's become the antithesis of the age, you know, where it's a celebrity age, you know, and I mean, it's interesting because that celebrity age kind of kicks off almost at the time that his career did, about 99, that sort of time. That's the sort of time when everybody, this new level of service was like crazy.
Banksy being painted over. I read in the Evening Post when they asked how many residents of Ledbury what they thought happened, and they said, "Oh, it's terrible that the graffiti art had been vandalised." I mean, what do you guys kind of think about that?
It's fantastic irony, isn't it? I think John, we look at this more than anybody.
I just find it ironic that the general public say that obviously somebody's defaced it, and these vandals defaced Banksy's work, and there's obviously some people researching whether Banksy's work should be protected in Bristol as like a listed building is protected. But one thing for me I'll say is that why should his work be protected any more so than any of the work that Chris has got on his walls outside there, or any of the other street artists in Bristol? Because for me it is street art, aerosol art, and whether you're Banksy, whoever, if your work is done illegally somewhere, are you setting precedent then by saying that his work should be protected, but no one else's should be protected?
But it doesn't kind of work like that, does it? I mean, when somebody is hugely successful, I don't want to draw a parallel, but I would inevitably do so. The Beatles, in Liverpool, they recreated the cabin. So maybe in another 20 years' time, they'll recreate the Barton Hill Youth Club. With a can in your hand.
Just to touch briefly on that anonymity thing again. I think for me, and going back to where Banksy came from, and the fact he was working highly illegally in his formative years, of course he didn't want him to know who he was, because he would have been arrested, fined, and I think probably imprisoned. Because they really were taken a rise. You know, after all, after that huge police operation, £500,000 spent for some, you know, for a bunch of kids from Kingswood and Barton Hills to just carry on, regardless, was well, it's a very courageous thing to do in many ways. Why do they do it? Why would they take that risk? Do they have to? Do they have to paint? Do they have to write?
Because it is the passion that drives them.
Yeah.
They are passionate people about their art and showcasing their art, and so if that's part of the price you have to pay for your craft, for your passion of art is to be arrested, then they were prepared to put themselves in that position. But one thing that for me is still the sweetest thing that came out of Operation Anderson, the chief superintendent of the British Transport Police, Tony Thompson, said that he would drive graffiti art out of this city. He said, mark my words, there will be no graffiti art scene in Bristol as long as I am in charge of the city.
So it's £500,000 well spent.
Where's it to now? He has actually got promotion and he's the head of Transport Police in the United Kingdom. And he oversees their policy of how they police.
But they have that irony, don't they, that the British Transport Police, well, they'll go around removing other people's work, not Banksy's.
Yeah.
You know, they'll be kind of,
I think it's one of
they'll be reading these books.
I think it's one of the myths and legends. There's actually a training course for council workers in London, the British Transport Police now to spot Banksy. You can just imagine this they're trying to identify the letter forms or the particular type of stencils so they can decide whether to struggle or not. Of course, John's absolutely right. You know, but do you think that Banksy has therefore enabled other artists' work to stay up for longer because people are now uncertain they're going to take it down because they might be reading something which is...
I would say so most 100% definitely in this city. I wouldn't know about London because London is the big city, obviously in the United Kingdom, but their artists, most of them, like traditional graffiti artists, they used to be predominantly trackside riders, tubes, trains, buses. As more and more CCTV comes into play in general life, it's harder to get away with painting than we do. But I think Bristol, yeah, a lot of people's work does stay up a lot longer.
Actually, one little point I'll raise is the case, but one of the little facts that I unearthed, which I thought was really fascinating when we did the app, was that there are actually more Banksy pieces still up in Bristol than there are in London.
Really?
I think we counted 40. We did an app recently, which is a guide to where all the Banksy pieces are in Bristol. There's 14 pieces on there, 13 now to take a slightly away. But there's 14 pieces that you can go around Bristol and see. And I think in London you've only got about 8 or 9. Many of the ones in London are perspex. You turn your nose at the perspex though, but do you not think there's maybe a case for putting some of the Bristol Banksy ones behind perspex here? No?
There's one piece behind perspex, which is a little rose and a rat trap up by the hair in the hill in Kingsland. I don't think any of those are protected in any way, shape or form. And which I find incredible, really. I've taken silence Banksy's point in his little black box that the whole nature of this art is that it will be absorbed into the urban environment. You know, it's part of the urban environment. But from the city council's point of view, I just can't understand why this huge tourist attraction isn't being protected and celebrated more. And I think that the word irony is one who's got a lot to do. And one of the greatest ironies I think about Banksy was that he was a saviour of Bristol when he did the museum show and brought a very, very conservative estimate of £10 million of new money into the city over 3 months. It's now evidence from research one of the national museum organisations that it's far, far more than that. A year later, he was described as a terrorist on the front page of the Evening Post when he did the Tesco Valley petrol bomb in order to raise money for the squat and work that Chris Evans is doing in Stokes.
Do you think Banksy's changed the debate on sort of ethics, as it were, of working illegally as a street artist? Do you think people are more sort of receptive to it now, or people, still more entrenched?
Well, I think it has opened up the way, like John's been sort of saying, it has opened up the way to make it more kind of acceptable, and it is. You look at what street art is now, and it is a kind of subculture, you know, in the same way that, you know, music is, or whatever, or fashion maybe, you know. So there are places where if you set yourself out as a street artist, you can go and paint. And I think that Banksy was, maybe not Banksy, but this whole generation of artists that, you know, John kind of worked with, kind of paved that way, and made it. There is you know, inevitably it's kind of gone more mainstream, and a lot of people don't like that. You know, a lot of people think that it's sold out and all that sort of stuff.
But are there those sort of visions within that scene?
Oh
Where
yeah.
people like say, oh, you shouldn't work like this, or you should work like this. I mean,
Yeah, for sure. That whole Robbo and Banksy thing is totally based on that.
I think one of the most peculiar things I find about street art is the lack of critical appraisal of it. I think people are afraid, art critics are afraid to evaluate street art because they don't understand it. I've never read a seriously critical piece of Banksy's work. I read pretty much everything I can about Banksy. John, you know, collects images of street art because there's street artists around the world. I don't know how you feel about John. You know, you said earlier on that it's almost an assumption that all street art is good because it's street art, which I find ludicrous.
But to be honest, I look at some of the street art in Bristol thing. That is not good. But I also, on the other hand, respect the fact that someone maybe starting out, maybe coming through, and then they're developing their style and, you know, expressing themselves somewhere where might not necessarily be.
Yeah, I think, but you know, it's art is what it's the impact it makes on you. I think, because I think it's as true as for street art. Sorry, you had a question there then. Yeah.
Do you think he's created a difference between the street art scene between like bombers and people who do paste ups and stencils?
I'll be honest, there's a lot of people within the traditional graffiti art scene that say they totally dismiss Banksy's work. He's not relevant to their world because he never had the respect of that sort of genre of artist because he never really painted with that type of those artists. And so obviously a lot of people don't like his commercialism. They don't like the fact that he's obviously exploited that situation. A lot of people don't like the fact through envy of the riches that he's acquired because of this, because obviously he is a wealthy man through his art. There's no getting away from that. And there are a lot of traditional graph writers who dislike Banksy's style, dismiss him for the artist that he is. But
I think the film made that worse as well, I think.
Yeah, the Team Robert, the Channel 4 documentary, Graffiti Wars, Banksy, Team Robert, has opened up a sort of animosity towards Banksy. It was I found it a very biased documentary because obviously one Banksy doesn't respond to.
Is it made by Robert?
No, it wasn't.
Well, he was taking the centre stage and being interviewed
Yeah.
all the way through it, so yeah, it was from his point of view, really.
But to be honest,
It kind of gave it gave him more credit.
it gave Robbo more credibility than he was, because I've met Robbo in the 80s and 90s. Robbo was a prolific graffiti train bomber in London. The tubes, he was like #1 bomber in London, without doubt. Ladbroke Road, Westbourne Park, all those sorts of things, plus all the tube network. He destroyed it. He did the piece. How all this came about, the Team Robbo thing, is because obviously Banksy did the graffiti, the decorating man pulling back the wall with the King Robbo thing. Without Banksy doing this piece over Robbo's work, Robbo's attention to the country as it is now, no one knew Robbo was, other than the graffiti writers who were back from in the day. He wasn't active, he wasn't prolific now. And Banksy really, by doing what he did, is give all of a sudden opened up a whole new world for Robbo, give him a leg up on the ladder, to the fact that all of a sudden he's doing these shows and he's getting approached to do commissions and
You say it's sort of like a rebellion against
rebellion against Banksy.
It's rebellion against what he sees as that sort of commercialisation,
Yeah.
mainstreaming of street art.
Well, I think one of the things I like most about Banksy's work is it often has consequences. And what I mean by that is, well, probably the best example is the Tesco Alley petrol bomb, which I must admit when I first saw it, I didn't think it was a great piece. But then got me thinking about, did he say, will Tesco actually sell petrol bombs so that you can then go outside and look at Tesco's? And, I think that again, you start to sort of question capitalism and major commercialism, etc. But also, what that piece did, it was sold at the Abacus Book Fair, and there was a lot of concern leading up to the Abacus Book Fair that the police would move in and try and arrest people at the book fair who may or may not be involved in the uprisings in Stokes Croft. And what the consequence of that was that 1,500 people, including myself, queuing around the block, it made it impossible for the police to do anything about the anarchist book fair or to move in. I think Chris, I'm right, said it also raised much needed money for local projects in Stokes Croft. Sorry, do you have your hand
I
up?
was only going to say that I'm a teacher, and one of our massivest challenges is engaging kids. And one thing that they really do care about is graffiti. And now, like, little kids are like, "Nah, miss, I hate everything except graffiti," and they're really bad at it, and they're not doing well. But it's one thing that could like engage them, and it'd be really good if we could capitalise on that a little bit more.
What school are you guys at?
No, I'm used to Bristol girls.
Boston Girls. And it's girls that are
There's other. The ones I'm thinking of are boys like up in Seamills, Charhampton. The other ones really.
What do they see in graffiti then? You think it's what's appealing for them? Is it the
partly it's like
illegality?
bright colours,
Yeah.
and partly it's something they think that teachers
Don't like.
Is there
just mean it's cool?
and is there any teachers that actually facilitate their interest?
I've seen one school do a project on it.
One school.
See, I think the varieties out there now in Phoenix, for example, there's a lot of work with young people. I don't know if any of those do particularly, and council, I think, is
There's a lot of the young. This was one thing I was going to say. A lot of the young people that I worked with at the time, that were primarily illegal writers, they now give something back because they still earn a living through art, but a lot of them have gone on because of the work that I did with them. It also gave them an interest in youth work, and that youth work wasn't just about stuffiness and gym activities in boys' clubs, but this generation, there's a lot of talent, a lot of cutting edge things that they're involved with, and basically a lot of the artists, like Annie Council, Acer, Felix, they've all gone on to become Barry as well, so they're involved with youth projects, access to music, and they give something back of their time, and maybe also if you, afterwards if you want to tell my number, I could maybe...
that's a very good point actually, John. Thanks to the work that you and others have done, it's engendered that sort of community kind of spirit. I think, I know also the work that Chris is doing down here. I think one of the great ironies for me about the Nelson Street thing, which I fully support as a fantastic event, was that it was funded by the council. What Chris does down here is entirely funded by volunteers, and it's, I think that's just another of the many ironies that we were discussing. No question about this.
Yeah. What artists would you say inspired Banksy? Like who did stenciling for him, or
What artists inspired Banksy?
Well,
I think
there's
there's
a
a lot, isn't there? There's obviously all the people that he was actually working with,
Yeah.
which Jones talked about. Then there's also, if you look at, I can't remember the woman's name now, the woman who did the Crass were an old punk band in the 70s. You look at the people who the person who did the artwork for them, very, very similar to this sort of stuff. Yeah.
Black Rat is on record as saying every time he has a new idea, he realises that Black Rat did it 30 years ago.
Yeah, Black Rat was a French guy back in the 70s doing this.
Personally, I don't see the Black Rat connection other than the sort of stencil. Well, the rat and also the stencil.
It's very similar way of communicating a message.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
I think Black Rat's kind of got a slightly, sounds really pretentious, like sort of smaller palette, like it's got like you can do less. I think one of the things that Banksy can do, and we don't give him credit for, is he can actually do a whole load of different styles.
Yeah.
He can do a whole lot of different things. You know, if you look at his books and stuff, he's done a lot of sculpture stuff. You know, have you seen the telephone box that's been chopped up and re-welded back together again and was left in the street? You know, and it's just, you know, the stuff that he does. I mean, all right, you could say, well, actually, he's got people working with him to do some of that. He's having the ideas, and it's kind of like he's getting them executed. You know, so you know, he's more than just pictures on the wall. He does free lunch and stuff as well. Like, see all the animatronic stuff at the museum, fur coat and stuff like that, and nuggets and stuff. You know, he's just got a while.
I don't think we should underestimate the fertile artistic scene that was taking place in this area and at Easton, because he would have been going to all the shows. People like Patrick Joyce, which probably very few people would know here, you know, was producing very powerful and shocking art at that time. He would have been going and seeing all of that stuff. So I would suggest that the product of, you know, where he came from is exactly that. It's all of the things that he was seeing, having been born and brought up in this city, which had a massive, you know, in the 80s you had Demolition Diner up here, 10 years ago, that started. I mean, there's an enormous amount of cultural creativity that this city is kind of, you know, we talk about Brunel all the time as being the centre of it, but actually there is a deep, you know, going back, you know, we have E.W. Godwin in the 1860s here who built all these beautiful buildings, and he was a dude like Banksy back 150 years ago in this area. So
well, you can see, I mean, you can see some of the earliest examples of Banksy's work appear on record sleeves. I mean, when he was starting to make a name for himself in the city, he was working with low-pop records and Montello, people like that, to produce record sleeves as well. You know, so, you know, I think music is a big influence on his work.
Well, I think that's, you know, it's easy now to look at Banksy as part of the system. He is system. So, you know, art is one of the main pillars of capitalism, and Banksy embodies that. But I can't overemphasize, for me, Banksy comes to work very, very radical. He's a legal painter. He's obviously got strong political views. I believe that he was quite strongly involved in the rave scene as well. But, you know, John knows more about that. So, you know, in all those formative years, he was very, very much working outside the system. You know, and the work that John did with the young writers in Barton Hill is so important to that whole thing. And also, I think the other person we haven't mentioned is Daryl, just 3D.
Yeah.
And Robert Del Nacho from Massive, because I don't quite understand why the New York hip-hop thing came back to Bristol the way it did. But certainly, Robert Del Nacho from Massive was a leading exponent of that, and again, was one taken away from prison, wasn't he, really? You know, he got his 2 strikes, and the next time he would have been prosecuted. And Banksy, as I said, you know, when he's going through Bristol, you know, seeing the 3D work was one of the things which really inspired him, which ties in again with the Demolition Diner over the road and Anarchist Squad. There was a certain radicalism after the St Paul's riots in Bristol, which is very
interesting. I mean, the Marlborough West, I don't know how many people are aware of this, is actually a comment on the way that the police treated, you know, what do you call it, like the free party scene, essentially. So the teddy bear represents the free party scene, you know, do you see what I mean? So he's like talking, he's a comment on, you know, sort of free parties, new age travellers, you know, and in this week we've had Dale Farm in the news, you know, it's kind of like, it's interesting how the stuff that he was talking about 10 years ago is still current, still...
That's the worst thing, isn't it? He is radical in his work, but he is actually, his success is due to capitalism. It's because it's unique.
Yeah.
So unique.
Yeah.
And he is so valuable.
Well, I mean, I think the reason that we can even have this discussion and we can talk about Banksy is that, as opposed to other artists, is because there are just layers and layers of Banksy. You know, there's these ironies and these contradictions and paradoxes. You know, and it's like.
It's like he's walking a tightrope every time.
And I think one of the stories I've put in here was about the day that the postal was for sale, and it was anarchy, sort of democracy and capitalism all in motion at the same time, because you know, people were buying those posters for £5 and then using an app on their phone, and they were having them on eBay for £200 by the end of the day, you know? And it was kind of like, it was amazing, kind of like, you know, juxtaposition of all of these kind of crazy ideas. And, yeah, just took my poster and went home and didn't think about it.
It's the living proof that that can happen. It's real and together.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're approaching, 1 minute past 2. I mean, if anyone needs to go now, I'll cut you over a few minutes. John, do you want the other question here?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you talked about the early scene at Brandon Youth Club, and I wondered whether there was still that thirst for developing art. I mean, I was a young child in the early 80s, and you know, we'd hang out at youth club, we'd try and do body popping, we'd try and do art, because there was nothing else to do. And just
I think this lady who was talking about the teacher who's proved that it is still a first career, would you say? And you're studying street arts part of your A level?
No, I'm thinking about younger children, so when I was maybe 10 or 11,
yeah.
and we were quite politically, but we were really aware of what was going on with Margaret Thatcher and stuff in the 80s.
Yeah.
And I wonder if kids who are of that age now are switched on to the whole movement for those reasons, or whether they're more interested in the iPhone or having things, or I mean, we just talked about iPhone apps and eBay and all that. None of that existed then.
I think it's an interesting point. I don't think you have the parliamentary opposition, or that you would have to Margaret Thatcher, for example, as you do now, is in politics for more middle ground. I think increasingly, you know, the underground is still there, and will always be there. You know, people like John will always be working with kids who are disaffected and outside the system. I think the difference is that the work that John and others have done is actually, you know, you just look out there now and you see its progression. So it takes inspirational people, comparison, like Chris and John do what they're doing to follow that tradition. And personally, I think that Banksy is absolutely key to that tradition. I know that he's people do regard him as some envy. Bristol's a small town, everyone knows each other, and there is jealousy there. Whether it's and some people genuinely don't like his work. You know, I can't respect people who don't like his work. But are there any other questions?
Did Banksy have any formal training, any artistic background? Did he work at all that himself? Because he's very critical of other artists who can't be bothered to learn how to draw from.
That's a good question. Yeah, well, I don't know. I wouldn't know.
I wouldn't
honestly. Yeah, I wish I could say, but yeah, I think there is a quote from him somewhere, isn't there? Something saying about how he was very good at art at school or something like that. So he must be self-taught, I think.
Yeah.
From little I know of Banksy, you know, talk to people who do know, he's always felt he can draw. He's always felt he's not a good sketching in a way that some people have a natural gift for. I mean, I just know that, you know, when you look at someone like Chio, for example.
That's for us all then.
Well, he just doesn't stop drawing, does he? You know, and then he stops drawing, it's the outside of really. So.
Quick question really. What's your favourite Banksy piece perhaps and why?
That's a good question. Should we if anyone wants to talk to us afterwards, I think maybe and if anyone else wants to contribute what their favourite Banksy piece is and why, and you can include canvases and...
Well, I'll stick my neck out first actually. I'll say Marble West. And I know that Chris disagrees with me, but I would like to see Marble West protected. Because I think in 20 years' time, when it's gone, we'll be sat here going, you know, Marble West, remember how cool it was, you know, and it will just exist in photos on the computer and it'll just be a real shame.
Well, what I think about that, the reason why we don't cover them is because it then requires of all of us a sense of communal responsibility. And for me, the debate is about public spaces and how we curate our own public spaces. Currently, we sit here looking across to massive advertising hoardings, and as Banksy has said, and this is the point, he gets the bigger picture. That is why he stands head and shoulders above everybody else, is that he gets the bigger picture, and he is interested in that debate about how our world should be, and that's why he is our man.
But the reason I like it is because I've kind of spent a lot of my life in this area, and I think that kind of symbolises this whole area and the whole PRSC movement. Just you know, it's sort of pivotal to the alternative Bristol, it's other Bristol that you're talking about.
Recovery, it becomes clearly other. It becomes something different. We become the guardians, and they're imputing value to that piece, whereas it's actually a communal piece when it remains unprotected and requires of us responsibility.
Which is why I sort of put the emphasis on the city council cover it. It's always up to them, isn't it? Right?
And so for that reason, no. But I do understand the idea of longevity.
To answer the question, I would say Wild West is also my favourite. Because for different reasons. So I started to plan to other sort of communities about St Paul's riots, the original 1980s St Paul's riots. I think its positioning is pretty much a welcome. For me, has always been a welcome to Bristol sign. You're just getting, you know, just entering the city. And I also think that, you know, the positioning of a lot of Banksy's pieces is absolutely key. I also the guys from Dry Brensey very early on, going out, you know, writing in places where they felt they were vulnerable, they insist on doing things there. And it was only when they stepped away and saw that because it is so visible to so many people, on buses or in cars or walking. So you very rarely looks down the back alleys. It's big, iconic pieces. I think that for me, the Wild West sums up a lot of this.
It's funny to play me like when all the shit went down the Tesco's, all the media, when they started off filming their film, they always panned across the I said, why didn't you go and speak to people instead, you know, rather than just focusing on the same thing again and again?
I remember seeing that basically a line of police just literally all the way in front of that very image of that behind them.
Yeah, but this is also a response
becoming reality. Yeah.
It was, originally it was going to be a very specific anti-consumerist piece, you know, rather than the police piece, which would be, you know, you chose not to do for whatever reason. But it wasn't really one of his many anti-consumer pieces, which, you know, which also chimed very much with Tesco. But maybe to wrap up, I mean, John, you know Banksy better than any of us do. He, you know, worked with him, and I know him very modestly. And said you don't think he played any great part in his development. I think I should tell people that in short they can. Banksy describes John Nation as the most important person in British art in the last 20 years. So
not to hype him up.
I'm sorry, John, I had to get that in there somewhere. What's your favourite Banksy piece? I mean, some of the early stuff with the Dry Bread School, it was fantastic.
I used to like the Click, the pollution piece, then but, and this is a good one, same again, Wild West, just because of everything it symbolises for the era, the time, the reflection of this where it's located. Yeah, it is like a welcome to Bristol piece, and coming from someone that was involved with inner city riots, someone that was involved with the acid house scene in the late 80s. I got arrested for organising Bristol's first illegal acid house gathering in 1988. I've got a lot of involvement with all those types of scenes, and so for me, yeah, Wild West, just because the irony of the teddy bear as well, and it's not actually an image of a riot, but we could be cutting people as well. Yeah. So yeah, Wild West, after, what's the ball?
Well,
whether it should be preserved, similar to Chris in White.
Yeah, no,
we've repaired it 3 times in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was tacked with blue paint and red paint, and a big KER appeared right across it as well, which very few people know. So, you know, again, communal responsibility. Most of that Wild West is not Banksy's paint anymore. It's people like us who have repaired it.
Interesting.
Well, do stick around and ask questions. I'm conscious that there are other events going on across Stokes today, so please support those as well. There are books here if you'd like to buy them. Do support what Chris is doing at the RSC. There's a fantastic gallery and shop next door. It's really, it's one of the most interesting art spaces in Bristol. So,
cheers.
Thanks very much. Thank you. If you're all looking for somewhere to go next, there